Hi, I'm Oli Freestone, a principal at Elixirr, and I'm here with David Guillebaud, associate partner at Elixirr and also author of the book Disruption Denial. The book is written in 3 parts. The first part talks about the forces of disruption, and then the second part moves on to deal with the issue of disruption denial and how organisations are tackling that, or not in some cases. Mm-hmm. And then before moving on to the final bit, which is the so what can organisations do? In the first section, you talk about these forces of disruption. Do you want to explain a little bit more about what those are?
Yeah, I think the purpose of the part 1 really was to make sure that the reader can understand that I'm not just talking about digital disruption, which is very topical, of course, all the forces of new business models and digital startups, of course, but also the whole impact of big data and robotics and so on and so forth. So I go over all those in a summary, hopefully in an accessible, readable way, but also adding on the other forces of disruption that organizations are facing. The geopolitical disruption that we're talking about, things over the horizon, Donald Trump, for example, but also the generational changes. New generations of people are reacting completely differently and many of the leaders of organizations are actually not really on the same wavelength as their customers, and also organizational disruption, how new generations, younger people are really not at home in the typical pyramidical command and control structures. So that's the first part.
And in the second part, you come on to talk about some fascinating concepts, one of those being the stuckness predicament. Mm-hmm. What is the stuckness predicament?
Well, I think most people at leading organizations understand it, actually. They're stuck. They're in a kind of trapped, and even if they understand the forces of disruption and how that might have even an existential threat to their future, their freedom of action is very limited. They have to report to their board and their shareholders in 6 monthly or quarterly. Therefore, short-term performance is really what drives them. Often their remuneration incentivization is linked to short-term performance. Often they're in the seat only for a limited number of years. Therefore, their incentive to actually do fundamental disruption is not there intrinsically. It's the idea of let the next guy do it kind of thing. And I talk about all those different traps that they're subjected to. But stuckness, particularly for publicly quoted companies, is a phenomenon that they all recognize.
Okay.
Sort of also a little bit as some people say, sort of caught in the glares of the headlights.
Yeah.
What should I do?
So kind of frozen into inaction.
A bit like that.
And you also talk about something which you've been advising boards and CEOs for a long time now, something called inbreeding syndrome. Now, is that something new, or is it something that's been around for a long time?
I think it's been around for a long time. I talk in my book, soon after I left business school, having been headhunted by an executive search firm for I think I was 27 or 28, for a potential position as the CEO of a division of a major conglomerate, because apparently my all my CV and experience ticked all the boxes. But I knew nothing about that industry, nothing about what's going on. So there's this whole inbreeding idea that we keep on recruiting people to the same sort of profiles, and they all come from the same educational background, and they go up and promote themselves up, get promoted up the greasy pole into the executive suite. And the result of that, and many of those people come from the same schools, the same business schools, and the end result is that you end up with very much clones in terms of, that's obviously not always the case, but people very much have the same attitudes to the institution and so on. And they don't have the capacity to look differently at things when fundamental threats and changes come about. And I talk, therefore, there about the phenomenon of the disruptive, the productive disruptor, the person who can come in there and actually productively disrupt, bringing a new DNA.
Okay. Where do we find these productive disruptors?
That's a good question. Well, There are a few examples that I've looked at, and it's interesting. It's very often that these people come from outside the traditional executive training and recruitment field, where you find people able to innovate in real time, and be able to think outside the box and be creative. You find those people very often in the performing arts, or in the officer corps of the military. If you're in the trench, you can't, you have a plan, but you've got to respond to what's going on. Or in sports management. So I'm encouraging people to think outside the traditional area of recruitment. It's a bigger pool out there. If you're going to have people really capable of looking differently at what goes on in the organization, then they've got to have a different DNA and improve the DNA of your organization that way.
Okay, so they do exist. You just need to be more creative in how you find them.
And they may exist inside the organization, but rarely for the reasons I just discussed, because most organizations are pretty much the same kind of people.
Yeah. And another concept your book deals with is that of the platform business. Now, platform is probably up there with one of the most overused terms in the last 12 months. But can you explain the context of how you're using the idea of a platform business?
Yes, I think it's interesting you say that, because many people have the idea there are certain kind of industries that lend themselves to platform business models, media and information and so on and so forth. And we know that the platform businesses that we come across in our daily lives, in the Facebooks or the Apple platforms and so on. But what I'm pointing out and recommending that actually every business in tomorrow's world has to have platform features. I call them platform-compatible business model. That means an ability to respond to the different type of customers that we now have with elements about data. Data as the fundamental currency of the organization, being able to handle that using all the algorithms that now exist, and the delivery model of products and services that actually responds to the needs of that, because you're not pushing it out to customers, and also the front end of the ability of customers and indeed suppliers at this end to interact with each other to create this sort of ecosystem that works. And so that idea is that everybody needs to have a platform, I think, is one that has caught the imagination of quite a number of businesses and indeed professors I've been talking to. Very often what's frightening people is, wow, how can I do that? I've got all my legacy here. What am I going to do? But actually conceiving platforms in that simple way, and then seeing how you can dig into your legacy, find what you actually need, but also get components that help you deliver that outside, and putting it together in something that customized for you is, I think, something encouraging. You don't have to junk everything if you want to move to a platform-compatible business model.
And that change in business model, it must have some implications for how the organisation itself is structured.
Yes, I think the business model itself, of course, means that it's delivering in a completely different sort of way. Therefore, you're going to have lighter structures where traditionally we've seen, thousands of people in major organizations. But I think the most important thing, the two most important things that are going to affect organizations are the fact that disruptors are going to fundamentally transform the way that organizations deliver many of their products and services. There's a very interesting study I referred to by the BBC and Deloitte that shows something like, it depends on where you draw the bar, 35, perhaps even 50% of jobs that are done by inside existing organizations are threatened by automation and robotization. 50% of those. So what does that mean for an organization? How do you anticipate that and deal with that? So that's one thing. But also there's the psychological thing of this, the millennial generations are not prepared to work in command and control central structures where they're told, where the organization is seen as a machine, where decisions are made by the elite at the top and the people at the bottom do as they're told. So that the classic pyramidical organization is really threatened, and people need to innovate, and I suggest a number of new organizational models that they might like to embrace.
So those are two critical preconditions, and then a third would be?
Yeah, I think the third is to to design into your own particular circumstances the array of options I talk about in the back end of the book, which is around things you can do to disrupt yourself. You can't change your existing business overnight, but there are loads of different things you can do to set up initiatives to create the environment where innovative disruption can take place under your umbrella, but don't smother them. And then move towards a new model of organization, which is giving people much more of a flat, less pyramidical organization, involving them in the decision-making process, and aspiring to, the higher process, the higher purpose of the organization. So it's two sine qua nons, and then to find out exactly in all those different things that I talk about in the book what is right for you, and then getting on track to manage that process of transformation.
Thank you very much for your time, David. We look forward to speaking again and hearing about how the concepts and the frameworks within the book are actually manifesting themselves practically outside in the business world.
Well, it's been great to be there.
Thank you.
And thanks, by the way, to Elixirr and you yourself for your support in the book. It was very greatly appreciated.